Night of the nightmare. Michael had grown tired of city life and decided to return to the village where he had spent his childhood. The village seemed like a peaceful place, far from the chaos of the modern world and surrounded by nature. However, when the villagers came to greet him, there was an unease in their expressions they couldn't quite hide. The elders, in particular, warned Michael about the house he would be staying in, nestled at the foot of the lonely mountain. They urged him to be cautious. Michael brushed off their warnings. The house, inherited from his grandfather, stood on the edge of the village, near a dark forest on a hill. It was an old, stone-built structure with thick walls. When Michael opened the front door, a damp, earthy smell greeted him. But what caught his attention was the strange, shamanic symbol engraved beneath a large rug in the middle of the living room. He glanced at it briefly before starting to clean and organize the house. As night fell, a heavy silence settled over Michael like a thick blanket. The howls of wolves from the forest and the creaking of tree branches in the wind echoed eerily in the old wooden floors. Michael lay in bed, trying to sleep, but he couldn't shake the discomfort. Around midnight, his eyelids began to droop, and he slowly drifted off. In his dreams, Michael found himself in a surreal landscape, seemingly from centuries past. The place resembled where the house stood now. In the distance, a tall man dressed in black robes, with a face obscured by shadows, beckoned to him, whispering, "Come." Against his will, Michael followed the man. Suddenly, the man turned, revealing his face fully. His eyes were pitch black, and his teeth were sharp and menacing. Michael's legs trembled, but he couldn't turn back. When he awoke, it was still dark. Sitting upright in bed, he was breathing heavily. Something was amiss. He heard a scratching sound at the door. Gathering his courage, he approached and opened it, only to find no one there. Yet, on the ground, long claw marks were etched into the dirt. Michael slammed the door shut and tried to steady his breath. The next day, one of the village elders, George, came to visit. When Michael shared the events of the night, George's expression grew grave. "This house is cursed, my boy," he said. "Years ago, a shaman lived here, attempting to control the nightmares that plagued the village. But a group of men from the city interrupted his rituals, and they paid a heavy price. Since then, anyone who stays here suffers the wrath of the nightmares." Michael found the story ridiculous, but couldn't shake the fear as night fell again. He lay in bed, unable to sleep. Suddenly, he heard footsteps coming from the living room. Fear gripped him as he got up to investigate. Entering the living room, he saw that the rug had been moved aside, revealing the glowing symbol beneath. From the symbol, black smoke began to rise, and a shadowy figure materialized. The figure advanced toward Michael, who tried to back away, but his legs wouldn't move. The shadow hissed, "Why did you wake me?" Michael couldn't answer. The shadow lunged at him, pinning him to the ground. As the dark entity began to choke him, a fragment of the prayer George had shared earlier came to Michael's mind. Stuttering, he began to recite it. The shadow froze momentarily, then screamed in pain as it recoiled. With his last ounce of strength, Michael covered the symbol with the rug, and everything fell silent. At dawn, Michael left the house and never returned. Yet, whatever happened that night followed him for the rest of his life. Whenever he drifted to sleep, he always felt something watching him from the shadows. The Curse of Misty Hill. Adrian had returned to the small town where he had spent his childhood. after many years. Just outside the town stood a mountain known as Misty Hill. As a child, he and his friends would listen to the legends surrounding the hill and create their own scary stories. But this time, Adrian was determined to uncover the truth behind the legends. In his late father's old house, Adrian had found a journal that hinted at a mysterious event related to the hill. According to the journal, in the 1870s, a group of people living at the base of the hill performed some sort of ritual. However, the ritual went horribly wrong, and everyone there suddenly disappeared. On the last pages of the journal, the phrase, "When the mists rise, the shadows return," was written repeatedly. Adrian was determined to solve the mystery of the hill. He packed a flashlight, a thick coat, and his father's old pistol before setting off. It was nearing nightfall, and as he reached the base of the hill, a dense mist began to settle. With each step, it felt as if the mist was growing thicker, pulling Adrian further in. Along the path, he came across the remnants of old stone structures. Strange symbols and writings etched into the walls caught his attention. Adrian wondered if this was the site of the ritual described in the journal. When he entered one of the structures, he found remnants of burned candles on the ground and a strange circle in the center. Just then, he heard a whisper, "Leave this place." Adrian froze and looked around, startled. There was no one there, yet the whisper was so clear that it was hard to believe he had imagined it. As he scanned his surroundings, he noticed a silhouette emerging from the mist. It was human-like, but Adrian instinctively felt it wasn't from this world. Summoning his courage, he shouted, "Who's there?" The silhouette suddenly started moving toward Adrian at an unnatural speed. Panicking, Adrian stumbled backward, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. His flashlight slipped from his hand and disappeared into the mist. As he struggled to get up, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Cold, icy. When Adrian turned, he was face to face with a featureless entity. Its face was smooth, with no eyes or mouth. Adrian screamed in terror, scrambling to his feet and running, but he had no idea where he was going. The mist made everything look the same. Eventually, he reached a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone monolith. The symbols carved into it were identical to the ones he had seen in the journal, but something was moving around the stone. Shadows, dark, human-like figures circling the monolith. Adrian, desperate to document the moment, pulled out his phone to take a picture, but all he saw on the screen was static. The shadows seemed to notice him and turned their attention his way. Adrian's heart pounded as he stumbled backward. He drew his father's pistol and fired blindly. The bullets passed through the shadows as if they weren't there. Just when Adrian thought it was over, the journal slipped from his pocket and fell open on the ground. A symbol on the last page began to glow intensely. Adrian watched as the light seemed to repel the shadows. Even the monolith itself appeared to tremble under the force of the light. Finally, the shadows dispersed along with the mist, leaving Adrian alone. The monolith had shattered, reduced to a pile of dust. But Adrian still wasn't sure if what he had experienced was real. He pulled out his phone again and turned on the camera. Looking at where the monolith had stood, he saw nothing but his own shadow. The next day, back in town, Adrian couldn't bring himself to tell anyone what had happened. But one thing was certain. The curse of Misty Hill might have been broken, but the terror of that night would haunt Adrian forever.